In this video, you're going to see how to automatically insert or remove a certain number of rows based on an input box from whichever row is currently selected. So in this example, we have a list of inventory items. When an item is shipped, we want to insert a row, or in some cases, multiple rows below it to add info about where and how many items were sent. So the VBA code will look at whichever row is currently selected, and an input box will appear asking how many rows to add below. We also have a button to remove rows beginning with the row that is currently active and an input box for how many rows below it to remove. First, save your Excel file as a macro-enabled workbook if you haven't already. Confirm that the developer ribbon is at the top of your file. If you don't see it, go to File, then Options, Customize Ribbon, check the developer ribbon and click OK. Next, click in the leftmost row below your headers and go to the View tab. Select the option to freeze panes, to freeze the header row while still being able to scroll through the rows below it. Next, insert 5 rows directly above the header row. We'll eventually place the macro buttons here so that they are always visible above our locked header row. Now we need to get into the VBA editor window. Go to the developer ribbon and click on the Visual Basic button. Then right-click anywhere in the project window and go to Insert and Module. In the window, type the keyword sub. We'll name our subroutine Insert Rows and hit Enter. Between the sub and end sublines, hit Enter several times to make some space for our code. Next, we'll declare our variables. The first one we'll call WS, which represents the sheet containing our data. The second we'll name Selected Row. It will represent the row number of the selected row. The third we'll call Number of Rows. It represents how many rows the user wants to insert. Next, we'll set up our worksheet variable. Since the worksheet is an object, it needs to begin with the keyword set. We set worksheet variable equal to this workbook, then worksheets, and the name of our worksheet enclosed in double quotes and within the parenthesis. The name of our worksheet is Sheet 1. Now, we'll define our selected row variable. We'll set this equal to the active cell, followed by the row to return the row number of the selected cell and store it in our variable. After that, we'll define our number of rows variable, which will be based on an input box. Since a user could input an invalid value such as text, we'll nest this inside an on-error resume next statement. This first line disables any input errors that would stop our code from running. In the next line of code, we define our number of rows variable. Here we want a prompt to appear before the user asking them to input the number of rows they wish to insert. So we set this equal to application and then input box. The first input of the input box is the message to be displayed to the user. The second input is the title displayed on the message box. The third input is the type of input allowed. In this case, we use 1 for numeric values only. The final line turns the VBA default error handling back on to stop our code and display error messages when they occur. We can hit play now to see what the input box looks like. We have our title and the message displayed to the user telling them to input the number of rows they wish to insert. Next, we'll add code to display a message when an invalid value is input by the user. Here we'll use an if statement. In the first line, we test to see if the input value stored in our number of rows variable is an invalid number. If that's the case, the next line of code displays a message to the user to input a positive integer. The line below that exits the subroutine when this happens. On the last line, we end our if statement. Now we'll add the code to insert the rows when the user makes a valid input. We begin by referencing our worksheet variable followed by the row range numbers where we want the insert to occur. The front of our row range needs to be our selected row variable +1 because we want the new rows to be inserted directly below the active cell row number. We then use an ampersand symbol to join the front end of our range to a colon, followed by another ampersand symbol to join it to the back end of our row range. The back end of our row range will be the value stored in our selected row variable plus the number stored in our number of rows variable. We then use the insert method with the Excel down option for the direction we want to shift the cells. Finally, we tell the code to use the same format from the row directly above for the new cells that get inserted. In our final line of code, we'll change the font color to blue for the new lines that get inserted. We begin with the exact same reference to our worksheet and insert row range as in the previous line. We then reference font, followed by color, and set it equal to a blue font color code. Now we'll add a second subroutine to delete rows on our sheet. This process will be much easier as we'll copy our first subroutine and just make a few modifications. So we'll come down below the end subline of our first subroutine, paste in the copied code, and change the name of the subroutine to delete rows. After that, we'll change the message and title displayed on our input box output to delete instead of insert. Finally, we'll delete the last two lines of code and replace it with one line of code that deletes rows based on the active cell and the number of rows below it to remove. The front end of our row reference will be the selected row variable, which is the active row number. The back end of the row range will be the selected row variable value, plus the value stored in the number of rows to delete variable, -1. We follow the range reference with the delete method and then a shift direction of XL up. Now we're ready to add macro buttons to our sheet and link the code we created to those buttons. At the top of the sheet, go to the Developer ribbon, then go to Insert and choose the macro button icon. Your cursor will change to a plus symbol, allowing you to draw in the desired button size. For now, click Cancel on the Assign Macro window that appears. With the button still highlighted, hit the keyboard shortcut Ctrl+C to copy the button. In the cells to the right of the first button, right-click and hit the Paste option. Then reposition the second button. Now right-click on the first button and choose Edit Text. Enter a descriptive name for your button. Repeat this step for the second button. Right-click on the first button and select the option to assign macro to it. Assign the Insert Rows macro to the first button and click OK. Repeat this step on the second button. Assign the Delete Rows macro to it. We can now click on any of our rows on our spreadsheet and click on the Insert Rows button, which will then prompt us to enter how many rows to add. We can also delete rows if they were added by mistake. Thank you for watching. Please consider subscribing.